Пожалуйста. Уважаемые коллеги,
Esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad to welcome you in St. Petersburg, one of the most beautiful cities of the world. I extend my heartfelt thanks to all of you, notwithstanding very busy working life and amid pandemic, you responded to the invitation to participate in the Conference of Heads of Prosecutors' Offices of the European States dedicated to prosecutors' role in human rights protection. This is very important because high-level support is indispensable here. Mindful of very high-level status of our conference, President of Russian Federation Vladimir Putin sent his welcoming address as well. Esteemed prosecutors, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you in St. Petersburg at the Conference of Heads of the Prosecutors' Offices of the European States, notwithstanding differences in powers and authorities and national legislations. Your offices are playing a key role in providing for rule of law in your respective countries, standing for the vested interests of states and societies. And those core goals and tasks are uniting you, and also they underscore the importance of collaboration, professional one. In the nearest days, you are to discuss a plethora of different issues related to the role of prosecutors' offices in protecting rights, mindful of the principles of European Convention on Human Rights. This is very important. Human beings, their vested rights and freedoms are highest value for the states, and governments should do everything they can to help citizens have their vested rights exercised. Right to affordable and available medical aid. This is very important, mindful of the pandemic. Also, there are other very important issues on your agenda, like compliance with the norms and requirements of environmental safety, countering cyber crimes, countering illegal migration. It's a shared common challenge for all European countries. And provided we have the effective response for that. That would streamline the sustainable development of entire world. Prosecutors' offices are embracing all those parts to comply with all those tasks. Russian prosecutor's office makes a great contribution into the development of Russia as a socially oriented legal state. Those principles were enhanced in the updated constitution of our country and in Russian legislation, exercising the supervisory powers. Prosecutors are seeing all the violations when they happen. During the pandemic, prosecutors' offices exercised the supervision over duly medical aid, medical drugs, social benefits. They exercised the importance of protecting the rights of vulnerable groups, disabled people, low-income groups, senior citizens of the country. A short while ago, a federal law was enabled. So prosecutor's office of Russia has got no powers. This is about presenting and protecting the interests of our country in intergovernmental bodies, international courts and arbitrations, and also in European Court for Human Rights. I reiterate that Russia is interested in development very close ties with prosecutors' offices of Europe and other states, other countries, to carry through with a dialogue within such an important agencies as the structures as Council of Europe and International Association of Prosecutors. I'm positive that sharing best legal practices and information will enable us by joint efforts to protect human rights and to have great success countering our common challenges, also the ones which are related to groundbreaking technologies and big changes in our lives of our societies. Throughout the conference, you'll come up with the recommendations which will further enhance the quality of prosecutors' office activities. I wish you most cross-fertilizing experience in the discussions. Thank you. Distinguished colleagues, today's high token away event, which has been long since waited for, will be enabling for us. We'll share our new ideas. We'll see each other one-on-one. After a very long recess due to the pandemic. I would like to extend the heartfelt thanks to the co-organizers of the conference, the Council of Europe, Björn Berg, the Secretary General of the Director General on Human Rights, on Rule of Law, Christos Nikonopoulos, International Association of Presidents, presented by Chonan Rao and Helen Rao, Secretary General. We have got very tight agenda for those 2 days, our dear colleagues. We have to work real hard. The subject matter of the upcoming discussions is very important and close to the heart on which and every Russian prosecutor, because big part of our work is supervision of compliance with the law in different spheres of human life, rendering aid to people to stand for their vested rights. We know the Venetian Commission position about the function of criminal procedures in court for prosecutors and recommendations for the Council of Europe for the member states about the role of prosecutors in extrajudicial field as well. And Russian prosecutor's office has gained big experience along those lines as well. Outside judicial sphere, in extrajudicial way, prosecutors exercise their legal function, which is in high demand around the world, because fair trial is very important around the world. As regards Russia, last year, as to the outcomes of our supervisory activities, more than 1 million people were reinstated in their rights. Those were also social guarantees for families with many children, low-income groups, and people who lost their jobs amid pandemic, retired people, and also our citizens got gratis medical aid amid pandemic. We are sorting out those important issues in close cooperation with the authorities. Very important aspect here is dealing with different motions and petitions of citizens. Prosecutor's office is the resort which will help people to be reinstated in their rights. It's very trustworthy ambience when people visit prosecutor's office. So we are going to different regions dealing with the motions and petitions and complaints. Among the priorities of the supervision, we see that we should stand for the vested rights of most vulnerable groups. These are working professions and also duly payment of salaries and wages to workers. Also, we stand for the vested rights of SMEs, because this is the basis of financial prosperity of many households. There should not be no petty administrative guidance every step of the way. There are some other things I would like to cover here. Year in, year out, environmental situation has been aggravated. People are disconcerted with the problems of air pollution in big metropolitan areas. potable water quality, compliance with sanitary requirements in collection and recycling the waste. All those directions are in the limelight of our inspections. Also, there are national reserves and specially protected areas, natural areas. For example, the gem of it is Baikal Sea, Baikal Lake. And we made a ruling about dismantling illegitimate constructions and developments in proximity to Baikal Lake, mindful of enhanced environmental hazard. Prosecutors also inspect the Arctic zone oil productions, and they should disrupt the future environmental emergency situations when it comes to oil spills and other things which have got very adverse repercussions upon the entire world. So our joint efforts along those lines are very important. Alongside with the major topic of our conference, protection of individual rights, we also will discuss cyber safety, mindful of the contemporary reality. We couldn't possibly bypass that important. The development of informational technologies amid pandemic brought about very high upswing of crime. In Russia, there are very big amounts, shattering amounts of cybercrime, which jeopardizes national security. Darknet oftentimes is used for crime. This resource helps to do human trafficking, drug trafficking, child pornography, other illegitimate information is traveling around internet. It's important for us to share our techniques and methods to counter illegitimate use of this content. Also, cryptocurrencies in our country are in shadow zone. In July 2020, federal law on digital assets was taken on board. Currently, the work is being done into amending criminal code and remedial code. And there would be different measures like forfeiture of the assets and virtual assets as well. So there are lots of crimes done via internet. And now we have approved indemnity clauses for that. Criminal use of virtual assets, digital money, other state-of-the-art technologies, inclusive of artificial intelligence, will be scaling up in future, and we should respond efficiently to that. Big risks in the sphere of safety are about extremist activities, terrorism, money crimes are used based on IT technologies. This is organized crime now, and people who are part of that are integrated into international criminal organizations full of the ideas of race supremacy, ethnic supremacy. We do the countering work in close association with law enforcement bodies. We are countering corruption and bribery, first of all. The latency of those criminal acts is being aggravated because now one can be bribed by cryptocurrency. Also, this is about squandering budget money, about money laundering, which we counter. This is only one chunk of different issues to be discussed within our conference. Tomorrow, today and tomorrow, we'll present our experience in rule of law, powers of Russian Federation Prosecutor's Office effectively protect private rights of the citizens as well. You'll be able to share your own ideas and you'll come up with your own proposals. By wrapping it up, I'm here to say once again, and President Putin said that in his welcoming address. Recently, new federal law was enacted, and the Prosecutor's Office of Russia will be representing the country in international national agencies, international tribunals and courts, and in European Court on Human Rights. To exercise this function, we create a new division of prosecutor's office, and that will mean more close contacts with the Council of Europe, and mindful of the powers of the Russian prosecutor's office, that will enhance the efficiency of complying with the rulings of European Court of Human Rights, mindful of international law. Dear colleagues, this meeting is a big stride forward to new formats of jointly countering all the perils and safeguarding rule of law. One of the co-organizers of the conference, heads of the prosecutors of European organizations, European countries, is the International Association of Prosecutors, uniting prosecutors general around the world. The president of the association is Mr. Chol Kyu Hwan. Floor is yours, Mr. President of the association. Я обращаюсь к нашему высокому собранию, к генеральному прокурору Российской Федерации, к уважаемым участникам. Для меня большая честь и радость принимать участие в этой конференции высокого уровня в самом прекрасном городе мира, вероятно.
The only worldwide international organization for prosecutors. Our association connects and brings learning and support to prosecutors in 177 territories, jurisdictions and territories across the globe. The IAP is co-organizing this meaningful conference together with Council of Europe and Russian Prosecutor General's Office of Russian Federation. And it's my great honor to represent IAP in this opening ceremony. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our host, Igor Krasnov, Prosecutor General of Russian Federation, and his prosecutors, for braving challenging circumstances to organize this prestigious event. Also, I'm so grateful to the COE and IAP officers, especially the IAP Secretary General and General Counsel are here with me for their hard work to this important meeting. As we move through the COVID-19 pandemic, it is more important than ever that we continue to collaborate, share experiences and learning, and work collectively together to strengthen our international cooperation and combat against serious transnational crimes and promote the rule of law and fairness, impartiality, and respect for human rights. The importance of the value of close collaboration is reinforced by the number of heads of prosecutors, heads of prosecution services who have attended this conference in person or joined online. Under the main theme of this conference, we expect to discuss in depth the role of prosecutors in protecting human rights and public interest in context of the European Convention on Human Rights. Among others, protection of human rights and serving public interest throughout the whole criminal justice process constitutes the most essential obligation placed on prosecutors. The IAP standards of professional responsibility and statement of essential duties and rights of prosecutors, adopted in 1999, clearly states that all prosecutors must fulfill these essential missions. The IAP has consistently and proactively encouraged and promoted and monitored the standards adoption across the globe and will continue to do so. In some jurisdictions, prosecutors have enlarged their work spectrum by engaging in policies and legislations related to major social issues. And now we are facing serious threats from environmental crime, healthcare crime, and cybercrime. This conference will provide an opportunity to discuss and explore these important matters further. Looking forward, I hope the valuable outcomes of this conference will spread far beyond Europe and with the assistance of the IAP to prosecutors in all regions of the world. They will certainly help all prosecutors in the world realize their common values and goals of rule of law and human rights protection. I wish you all health, happiness, and great success. Thank you. Spasiba.
Thank you, Mr. Chol. As I've mentioned before, our conference is dedicated to the role of prosecutors in protection of individual rights and public interest in the light of requirements of the European Convention on Human Rights. And personally, Director General for Human Rights and Rule of Law, Mr. Yakoumopoulos, has helped us a lot in organizing this conference. Please, the floor is yours.
Prosecutor General of the Russian Federation, dear President of the International Association of Prosecutors, dear Prosecutor Generals and High Representatives of prosecutorial offices in European member states and beyond, distinguished Presidents of Council of Eurobodies, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start by thanking our host, the Prosecutor General of the Russian Federation, Mr. Igor Krasnov, for the honor that he makes to all of us to be received in this splendid palace, the Konstantinovsky Dvorets, on the occasion of this high-level conference. May I recall that our joint initiative to hold today's conference dates back to April 2019. It is significant that this idea has survived the COVID crisis. And this shows that there is a need for this lively dialogue between European prosecutors at the highest level, and that this need has prevailed over numerous difficulties that complicate our lives so much and so often nowadays. I would also like to thank the President of the International Association of Prosecutors, Mr. Sheo Kyu Hwang, and its Secretary General, Mr. Han Moral, for having agreed to co-organize this event, an extraordinary event because with 350,000 prosecutors around the world connected through the IAP in 177 countries of the world, the IAP, the International Association of Prosecutors, has become an extremely powerful partner since its very establishment 25 years ago. I would also like to welcome all our high-level participants who represent 30 countries including 20 general prosecutors attending this conference and who are sitting with us in this hall. And I'm also very grateful to the three presidents of the Consultative Committee of European Prosecutors, of the European Commission for the Efficiency of Justice, of the Vice President of the Venice Commission, who are willing to enrich this conference. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to say a few words about the topic of today's conference, which is actually very central to the activities of the Council of Europe. Our basic assumption, the basic assumption of the Council of Europe, which is actually enshrined in Article 1 of the statute of the organization, is to achieve a greater unity among its member states, greater unity among its 47 member states. And this can only be achieved, says the statute, and I quote, by discussion of questions of common concern and by agreements and common action, which include, of course, first and foremost, the maintenance and further realization of human rights and fundamental freedoms. This is what you are doing in your everyday life. Prosecutors are indeed important actors of this immense common legal endeavor. Their functions lead them both to pursue the public interest and to protect human rights. They participate actively in the implementation of the European Convention of Human Rights. This is why we have decided, together with our co-organizers, to make the Convention the central topic of this conference, of today's and tomorrow's event. The standing challenge in human rights law that the Strasbourg Court is called to address in every day, in every case, consists actually of striking a fair balance between the public interest and the individual rights. And you know better than I that prosecutors are also daily confronted to this very same challenge, however different their functions may be in different states. In the criminal justice field, prosecutors play an essential role when it comes to ensure respect for the right to a fair trial of every accused, the presumption of innocence, the independence of the investigation, the protection of the rights of victims. The case law of the Strasbourg Court, supplemented by the recommendation on the role of public prosecution in criminal matters, it's the recommendation 19 from 2000, set standards, principles in this area. And the opinions of the Consultative Committee of European Prosecutors deal with more specific aspects regarding the prosecutor's role in criminal investigation. I will refer to the recommendation number 10 from 2015 in relation in particular to the rights of victims and of witnesses in criminal proceedings. Along with the Rome Charter, these texts shape the legislation and the practices in all 47 member states of the Council of Europe, and I would say also beyond. Whenever the domestic law empowers prosecutors to act outside the criminal law field, they are likewise called upon to represent the public interest and again uphold human rights, fundamental freedoms and the rule of law. The function of supervision of legality in specific fields, which exists in some countries, allows prosecutors to protect the rights and freedoms of large and quite often marginalized or disadvantaged groups of individuals, or the protection of the public interest. In doing so, the prosecutors may address numerous human rights challenges including the protection of public health, and the recent crisis has been so important in this field, protection of the environment, the protection of minors, combating the illegal migration while protecting also the rights of migrants from exploitation, and the protection of the entrepreneurs. Again, the recommendation of the Committee of Ministers from 2011 on the role of public prosecutors beyond the criminal sphere constitutes a common European standard that shapes prosecutorial activities whenever they exercise functions beyond the criminal law. In the opinion of 2000 of the Consultative Committee of European Prosecutors, in opinion number 3, and the Rome Charter, these functions are set as principles. So these common standards, the ones I have just mentioned, echo both the rich diversity of prosecutors' functions in Europe and in the world, and also the basic principles that are applicable to prosecutorial functions. Beyond their important human rights functions, prosecutors participate in the proceedings based on other conventions of the Council of Europe, and not minor ones. I'm referring to the European Convention on Extradition, mutual assistance in criminal matters, transfer of sentenced persons, and several of you have already referred to that, prevention of money laundering, fighting against corruption. I am delighted to see that all these topics are included in the agenda that you will have to address these days, today and tomorrow. And I am sure that our discussions will be a useful update on the new laws, new practices of our Council of Europe member states and of other states here represented and engaged in cooperation activities with our organization. I am also convinced that our discussions today and tomorrow will be very timely. It is a long time that we have not convened in the Council of Europe at an event of a similar level. The public health crisis and the new challenges it has confronted us with makes our discussions even more topical. And as we were preparing this event, we have also realized that the last edition of our manual on human rights and for prosecutors was published by the IAP, the International Association of Prosecutors, more than 10 years ago. Perhaps it's time to update it with the new challenges that we are facing. Be assured that the Council of Europe is ready to contribute to this by providing substantial input and on the relevant and new jurisprudence of the European Court and on the best prosecutorial practices that have been highlighted through the activities of the Consultative Committee of European Prosecutors and the European Commission for Efficiency of Justice. Ladies and gentlemen, before I conclude, I would like to emphasize once again that the powers of the prosecutors among our member states are not only diverse, but they are also evolving all the time. And this will make our discussions even more interesting. An example to which the Prosecutor General has already referred, and I would like to refer to it too, is the role of the Prosecutor General of the Russian Federation and the new powers to plead cases in Strasbourg. This is an important development. We have looked into these amendments to this law, and the new powers will not only involve the Procuratura in the Strasbourg court proceedings, but will also imply a more active role in the implementation of the court's judgments. We are looking forward to hearing from our Russian partners how they plan to enhance the implementation of the Convention at the national level. There are so many legal issues that may be better tackled domestically, so as to remedy violations quickly before they even reach the Strasbourg court. A last point. In some weeks from now, the Protocol 15 to the European Convention of Human Rights will come into force. Protocol 15 establishes the principle of subsidiarity, and this principle will thus become a central element of the Convention. It should not remain a principle on paper. We need the Convention actors, prosecutors included, to promote the implementation of the Convention and the Court's judgments in their daily work, so that the subsidiarity becomes a reality on the ground. Subsidiarity can only happen if the national justice system is genuinely independent, is genuinely fair, and if national authorities' decisions on human rights issues are guided by the European Convention of Human Rights, of lawfulness and principles of lawfulness and proportionality. So we are looking forward to hearing from the wide and diverse community of prosecutors represented here on how to make this happen. Thank you very much for sharing your diverse experiences and your wisdom with us. I wish you a very successful conference. Thank you.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much. The Prosecutor's General Office of the Russian Federation has been closely cooperating with the Directorate of the Human Rights Protection and the Rule of Law, and one of the results was the establishment of the Consultative Council of European Prosecutors. And now I'd like to give the floor to the President of this Council, Mr. Nogueira. Please, the floor is yours.
Good morning to everybody. Dear Prosecutor General of the Russian Federation, dear colleagues and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, friends, it is an honor and a real pleasure for me to be invited to this conference, and I would like to express my sincere greetings on behalf of the Consultative Council of European Prosecutors, that is the CCP, to all the participants. However, I would like, in a very special way, in a particular way, to thank the Office of the Prosecutor General of the Russian Federation for an excellent organization of this important event in cooperation with the Council of Europe and the International Association of Prosecutors. I'm very pleased by this opportunity to express a few ideas, to express a few words about the Consultative Council of European Prosecutors, which plays a significant role in the overall structure of the Council of Europe bodies and institutions. The CCP is in fact a unique body of its kind. It's comprised of serving prosecutors, which is extremely important. It refers to the prosecutors as such, individually speaking, which is essential. From each of the Council of Europe member states, acting, as I was saying, in the individual perspective, in the individual approach, in the individual capacity. In this way, the CCP provides a voice and a perspective of serving prosecutors throughout Europe. It focuses on the practical context and aims to help to ensure the prosecutors can work, as it was already mentioned by my predecessor in the speech, in an independent, impartial, and effective way, when fulfilling their important responsibilities within the national legal system, within the legal system of the member states. We will agree that prosecutors play a powerful and influential role within society, and their voice is important. It is important since they uphold, through their actions, through their interventions, the rule of law, fairness, impartiality, and safeguard the liberties and freedoms of fellow citizens. We don't have to forget, we never should forget, the fact that we are absolutely based on society. That's absolutely essential to keep it in mind. Fearless prosecutors and prosecution services, tenacious in their pursuit of justice, protective of their independence and impartiality, free of political control and direction, actively cooperating internationally to combat crime, will always be a bulwark for freedom and for liberty. The CCP is in some occasions referred as the prosecutorial arm of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe, Up to a certain extent, that's absolutely true, I have to say it. That means that it's through the CCP that the best European practices are assembled, analyzed and transformed into soft law standards and guidance which the Committee of Ministers transmits to its member states for reinforcing the status of prosecutors and their independence, impartiality, and everything which is positive and creative in their work. Since the establishment in 2005 of the CCP, there has been adopted 15 different opinions, which covers the most essential aspects of the prosecutorial profession and support the work not only of the prosecutors, but also of policymakers and other legal professions. In fact, the different opinions prepared by the CCP are being taken into consideration basically in all the legal approaches in the different 47 member states of the Council of Europe. CCP standards help in creating a conducive legal, institutional and procedural framework for prosecutors and consequently enable them to effective work on cases and disputes at national level, in line with the European Convention of Human Rights and also in line with the case law of the European Convention of Human Rights, which is probably the best jurisprudence in the world. I have to say it openly, and I'm absolutely sure of the words I'm expressing. The current context of the COVID-19, as Mr. President of the Russian Federation, Mr. Putin, made it clear, the COVID-19 pandemic has been particularly challenging for all of us. In 2020, which is correct as well, the CCP adopted its landmark opinion number 15 on the role of prosecutors in emergency situations, in particular when facing pandemic. The restrictions introduced as a result of the pandemic, which you all know and you are very familiarized with them, affected to various extents to civil and political rights protected by the European Convention of Human Rights, as well as economic, social and cultural rights, entailing discrimination against certain vulnerable groups, which has been already underlined by some of my predecessors in this event. This is why it is all of the more important for prosecutors to continue ensuring respect for the European Convention of Human Rights in member states during the pandemic, which appears to be ongoing and probably for a long time, I'm afraid. We have a key role to play to ensure that the measures taken under a public health emergency are used to protect people and that new legal measures are applied with strict respect of human rights obligations, avoiding logically any type of discrimination, because through that sort of situations, discrimination might appear as well, and that's very dangerous, obviously. Fighting corruption is something as well regarding which I would like to speak, as well as related economic and financial crimes, is another challenge for the judiciary and for the prosecution service. In 2019, the CCP adopted opinion number 14 on the role of prosecutors, prepared in close cooperation with the Group of States Against the Corruption. The acronym is GRECO, you probably heard of GRECO very often, which is the Council of Europe's anti-corruption body. The opinion serves, opinion number 14, as a practical guide for prosecutors as regards the definition of corruption, particular aspects for prosecution service in individual prosecutors when fighting against corruption, institutional requirements and safeguards needed for this task, including the legislative framework, resource, staffing, organizational mechanism, and the training and specialization of prosecutors. Other opinions, which are also very important of the CCP, include contextual insights into important issues such as independence, accountability and ethics of prosecutors, the quality and efficiency of the work of prosecutors, including when fighting terrorism and organized crime. The role of prosecutors in relation to the rights of victims in those contexts is essential, as well as witnesses whenever it's criminal or other types of procedures. In this type of cases, proceeding relating between prosecutors and the media and other aspects are also important. Don't forget that whatever is done by the prosecutor, if it's not communicated to society, and this is done through the media, then it's like having been doing nothing. Because at the end of the day, you keep the whole work in a very restricted approach, which is, from the social point of view, absolutely new, absolutely unacceptable. Last but not least, opinion number 9, elaborated in 2014 of the CCP on European norms and principles concerning prosecutors, including the Rome Charter, covers the evolution in Europe of relevant norms and best practices guiding the work and profession of prosecutors, in line with the requirements of the European Convention of Human Rights and the case law of the European Court of Human Rights. As prosecutors, we need to be vigilant in guarding against the danger of providing a big leap of legal respectability to what in reality are situations which are not respectable, which are situations which depart or are devoid of the rule of law. Sometimes that sort of aspects are kept outside our mind, and I think is an approach that should be in our mind just at the first minute when we get up in our rooms after sleeping. The first thing we should have quite clear in our mind is this need of respectability and the need to apply the rule of law in a way which can be seen in society. The CCP is always at your disposal. The CCP is absolutely able and eager to provide you support and expertise in country-specific situation upon request, taking into account the CCP standards, as I mentioned earlier. Please do not have any doubt about that. We are at your disposal. We are absolutely decided and happy to help you. And we will do the best we can do for you in ever, wherever, any kind of situation or perspective. In conclusion, in addition to giving us the opportunity to meet again, which is essential, both in person and online, I'm confident that the present conference will contribute to raising awareness about key Council of Europe standards, which are designed to guide the work of the prosecution service, as well as of other professionals in line with the fundamental requirements of the rule of law and human rights, and pave the way for an effective implementation of the European Convention of Human Rights. As prosecutors, we must never lose sight of our real value and contribution to society, which we can make sure that the rule of law is upheld. It's the only way to uphold properly the rule of law. There is something I would like to say as well, to finish. And it's my personal feeling. But to tell you the truth, this is probably the very best organized event I have been attending in the last year, before, during, and probably after the pandemic. My warmest congratulations. You have been doing a great work, and of course, we will be delighted to come back to Russia in the first opportunity we have. Thank you very much again, and spasiba to everybody.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much for your kind words. Dear colleagues, one of the tasks and purposes of our conference is about exchanging information on legal systems of our respective countries and proposals for enhancement of its activity, functioning, quality. European Commission on Efficiency of Justice will make a great contribution into that. Floor is going to President of this European Commission on Effectiveness of Justice, Ramir Gurbanov. Floor is yours. Дамы и господа, генеральный прокурор Российской Федерации, гости, участники, я хочу выразить глубочайшую признательность организаторам за то, что они устроили эту конференцию высокого уровня по эффективности правосудия.
The protection of individual rights and public interest under the European Convention on Human Rights. The Russian Federation, currently and recently being hit hardly by the COVID crisis, and my thoughts are with the persons concerned and their families. Every member of the Council of Europe has accepted the principle of the rule of law and of the enjoyment by all members and persons within its jurisdiction of the human rights set out in the European Convention on Human Rights. In the Council of Europe recommendations are envisaged that all member states should take necessary and appropriate steps to ensure that prosecutors carried out their role with special regard to the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms, and in full accordance with the rule of law, in particular with regard to the right to fair trial enshrined in Article 6 of the European Convention. The public prosecutors have to exercise their responsibilities and powers both in criminal and non-criminal justice field independently, transparently, and in full accordance with the principles of legality, objectivity, fairness, and impartiality. In this regard, the different bodies of the Council of Europe render their assistance to the member states in the field of proper implementation of the conventional requirements. And the creation of the CEPEJ almost 20 years ago demonstrated the will of the Council of Europe to promote the rule of law and fundamental rights in Europe based on the European Convention. Driven by the increasing number of the cases in the European Court of Human Rights, the Council of Europe has deemed it necessary to work more precisely on the efficiency and quality of justice at a national level. In this perspective, the Committee of Ministers entrusted the CEPEJ with the task of analyzing the various judicial systems in their compliance with the requirements and standards of the Council of Europe, preparing and publishing a biennial evaluation reports on the judicial systems in order to have a precise photography of the situation in Europe. Based on this report and analysis, defining best practices and advising on areas for possible improvements, and proposing concrete tools to assist courts, prosecution authorities, and judicial institutions to render justice in a better way in order to increase the confidence of users. The CEPEJ received also from the Committee of Ministers a mission of so-called after-sales service concerning the Council of Europe instruments, as it has the responsibility to enable their better implementation in member states by analyzing the judicial systems in their compliance with the requirements of the Council of Europe concerning efficiency and fairness of justice. In that framework, it concerns for prosecutors the better implementation of two important recommendations of the Committee of Ministers on the role of public prosecution in criminal and non-criminal justice systems. Concretely, CEPEJ tools elaborating by its experts of working groups on quality of justice, evaluation, time management, and cyber justice are addressed to all national justice institutions, courts, but also to prosecution services. I will limit myself to the most recent tools which are fully relevant for the daily work of the prosecution authorities. This is the guide on communication with the media and the public for courts and prosecuting authorities, guidelines how to drive change towards cyber justice, Saturn guidelines for judicial time management, which contains a specific part for prosecutors, and very recent guidelines on video conference in courts, also applicable to public prosecutors. In order to fulfill its tasks, the CEPEJ has undertaken since 2004 the process of evaluating every 2 years the European judicial systems. In general, it's very useful to check the latest CEPEJ evaluation report to have comparisons concerning prosecutors in a European perspective. The figures in this report make it possible to have an overall picture of the functioning of the public prosecutors in Europe, their tasks, and the means at their disposal in order to measure efficiency and their contribution to the effectiveness of judicial system. You know that independence and autonomy of the public prosecutor's office are an essential prerequisite for the independence of the whole judiciary. Based on our reports, we found out that the status and organization of prosecutor services differ widely across Europe, we observed the positive trend of providing the statutorily independence to public prosecution in European states. From 47 countries, in 31, the public prosecutor is declared statutorily independent. In addition to their essential role in criminal matters, more and more countries across Europe are granting to public prosecutors important prerogatives outside the field of criminal law. In 33 states, the public prosecutors may intervene in civil and/or administrative cases, and we identified the tendency in increasing the role of prosecution in other than criminal justice system. Relating to the overall budget allocated to prosecution, we also identified the overall increase. For example, the Bulgaria, Iceland, Italy, Switzerland are the countries which allocated the larger amount of budget to the prosecution services in the recent years. On average, in the European states, they spent 14 euro per inhabitant on prosecution system. Russian Federation spent almost 8 euro per inhabitant. Relating to the number of public prosecutors in Europe, it's worth to indicate that since 2010, there is an ongoing trend of increasing the number of prosecutors. The average increase across Europe since 2010 is almost 10%. Most states in Northern, Western, Central, and Southern Europe employ very low number of prosecutors. For example, Switzerland, Turkey, Germany, Austria, France, England, Norway, Portugal. Higher numbers of more than 15 prosecutors per 100,000 inhabitants can be found mainly in more Eastern Europe countries, such as Hungary, Bulgaria, Latvia, Slovak Republic, and Moldova. The number of prosecutors in the Russian Federation is among the highest in Europe, with almost 23 prosecutors per 100,000 inhabitants. And we observed the recent increase in 6%. Relating to the workload of public prosecutors, very briefly I would like to inform you that we observed the decrease in the workload of prosecutors across Europe. And many countries in Central and Eastern Europe have a significant number of prosecutors for a relatively small amount of cases. Countries of Western Europe, such as France, Austria, Italy, and Luxembourg, have a rather large workload despite the low number of prosecutors. In the Russian Federation, with 23 prosecutors per 100,000 inhabitants, they handled almost one case per 100,000 inhabitants. But at the same time, I would like to mention that average European ratio of non-prosecutor staff attached to the public prosecutors has decreased from 2010. Dear ladies and gentlemen, these various activities of the CPESH have a unique objective indicated in the missions given by the Committee of Ministers. It said that all necessary measures shall be taken to protect and promote the status and role of public prosecutors, and at the same time to ensure the efficiency and competence in order to enable them to perform their professional duties and responsibilities without unjustified interference. The concept of the rule of law implies that prosecutors who are responsible for ensuring that all political, economic, and social actors and citizens respect the law, exercise their functions within a legal framework and conformity with law and standards. In the meantime, as stated in Opinion 13 of the Consultative Council of European Prosecutors, the general mission of prosecutors is demanding and difficult. It requires professionalism, character, courage, balance, and determination. How to comply with all these requirements is our objective today, and I hope that these discussions will be fruitful and productive. Уважаемые дамы и господа, и завершая свое выступление и пользуясь случаем, я хотел бы...
Ladies and gentlemen, by finalizing, I would like to underscore a very high level of preparation of this high-token event, this conference of the heads of prosecutors' offices in the European states, and wish very fruitful work to all the participants. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Gurbanov. I would like to give the floor to another guest of ours, Vice President of Venetian Commission, Member of Constitutional Assembly of French Republic, Basile Mellery.
Mr. Prosecutor General, and ladies and gentlemen, уважаемые участники, коллеги. In this opening session of this very important conference on the role of prosecutors, as a representative of the Venice Commission, the European Commission for Democracy Through Law, I would like to confirm the interest and, moreover, the importance the Commission continues to attach to the work done for and with Russia. The Venice Commission participates whenever it's possible in the international congresses and conferences organized by Russia, especially in the periodical legal forums here in St. Petersburg, during which many constitutional rules are discussed, and of course, in the forums about comparative law. And that's why I have a special reason to welcome Mrs. Khabrieva, who is also a member of the Venice Commission of Russia. This opening session gives me an opportunity to tell how the Venice Commission works. Members of the Venice Commission, of course, cannot actively participate in the drafting of opinions on the country they belong to, but they provide major inputs for all other opinions, as well as for general studies or guidelines issued by the Venice Commission. Each member brings the intellectual and academic contribution that nurture the VC's positions and also provides for legal follow-ups about the work done. I must insist on that point. All our opinions are the product of a collegial discussion from the group of rapporteurs to the plenary session, each member of them having a national background, and that's to say, a different cultural and professional experience. But each one is bound to the values enshrined in the European Convention on Human Rights. The best example of the kind of comprehensive work it allows is the Rule of Law checklist adopted in March 2016 following the report on the rule of law in 2011. But it's from 1991, when the Commission created, this model left room for adaptation to various systems and approaches, and it nevertheless allowed to assert continuity on the main issues. Of course, the standards we refer to are not different from those used by the European Court of Human Rights, and you'll find quotations of case law in our opinions. But in this case, it's always as examples of application of common standards when countries could have their own way in implementing them because a more or less wide margin of appreciation is necessary, or because their legal system is differently organized. That is also why you can find in our opinions other examples coming from various countries, because we try to find out mechanisms or solutions that could serve as references because of legal and sometimes cultural similarities. The compilation of Venice Commission opinions and reports concerning prosecutors published in 2015 gives examples of the approach of an issue by the Venice Commission. The item which will be discussed during this conference is one of those where various models exist in Europe and where the discussion shows the necessity not to recommend a model, but to bring out the indispensable legal safeguards for citizens or legal persons. We are not judges, as says the word opinions, which is used for the documents issued by the Venice Commission. Our conclusions could sound critical and sometimes the opinion could set out more negative aspects than positive ones. But their implementation is left to the national authorities involved. Anyhow, in assuming responsibility for using sometimes stern terms, the Venice Commission tries to be pedagogical, and our opinions leave more and more room for the explanations given by our interlocutors in order to make sure our points and their points have been thoroughly considered. Going back to the subject of this conference, we can note that our opinion, Prosecutor's Office in Russia, published in 2005, was not reiterated. But since the role of the Prosecutor General appears as part of our opinions on more general issues, and our last opinions on the recent constitutional amendments deserve mention in this respect, because they gave us the opportunity to renew our knowledge and understanding of Russian institutions, and notably the relations of the Prosecutor's Office with the Constitutional Court. But I leave more comments on this point to our round table. And I wish you a very successful conference. Thank you for your attention. Спасибо за внимание.
Большое спасибо.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bazim Mallory. Dear colleagues, thank you very much for the attention. And the opening ceremony is concluded. After a small coffee break, we will start our plenary session that will be dedicated to the role of the Prosecutor's Office in protection of individual rights in the light of a European Convention on Human Rights and the European Court on Human Rights. And I wish all of you to enjoy the meetings here in this offline format. Thank you very much. Good morning once again. I'd like to welcome you here in St. Petersburg at our conference, and I'm honored today not only to moderate this plenary session, but also to open it with my own speech. And together with myself, the expectations and the ideas will be shared in terms of the protection of human rights and the role of a prosecutor's office from the point of view of ECHR. We will have our colleagues, Mr. Davtyan from Armenia, the general prosecutor from Belarus, Mr. Shvet, General Prosecutor from Republic of Moldova, Stoyan Ogla. He will join us online. Unfortunately, he could not come here. And Mr. Rahmon from the Republic of Tajikistan. General Prosecutor from Italy, Mr. Salvi. And the judges from ECHR, former judges, Mr. Meyer and Mr. Kovler, who will also join us online by video conference. So please allow me to start our discussion. We all know that the prosecutor, this term comes from Latin procurare, which means to manage or to take care of, and the legal dictionary gives us the definition as an official who is responsible to represent the interests of a citizen in criminal proceedings. And in English, we have the prosecutor term, which shows us the role in the litigation. And in French, it's not so categorical, and it is applicable also in non-criminal proceedings. And I will not dwell upon it in detail because the colleagues will discuss that at other sessions. But why am I mentioning it? As we see here, the perception of this term is diverse, and it demonstrates that the roles in different European countries are different. These are bodies. Sometimes it is a part of the Ministry of Justice, or like in Russia, it's a public body that upholds the rule of law and law enforcement. And we see it projected in the representation that we have in ECHR and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and some prosecutors' offices participate in this process, as it has been mentioned before. On the 1st of July, the federal law was adopted with the amendments in the activities of the prosecutors' offices, and now they have new functions, and it includes also standing up for the interests of Russian citizens in ECHR, upholding the rule of law, the fairness, the protection of freedoms and human rights. The prosecutor's office of the Russian Federation has all the necessary tools to ensure all these processes. And as for the commissioner of the Russian Federation at ECHR, it has been severely criticized that it is protecting only the interests of the state and not of its citizens, but I do not agree with that. The interests of the state is the restoration of the rights of citizens who have unlawfully suffered. And now I'd like to go back to the history and remind you that in 2002, the interview was published, the interview of the first commissioner at ECHR, Mr. Laptev, was published in Rossiyskaya Gazeta. And if the applicant is right, that was the name of the interview. And the commissioner gave a very good wording. I'm on the side of the law, and it is a very applicable term in the activities of the prosecutor's office of the Russian Federation. And 20 years ago, the compliance with the respect some of these complaints were revoked, and in 2003 the first treaties were signed, and then the mechanism of unilateral recognition was adopted. And in recent years this work helped us to restore the applicant's right, and it was about 500 to 600 cases that were heard in ECHR, and the compensation was provided. In addition to the tools that I've already mentioned, the prosecutor's office of the Russian Federation now has the opportunity to conclude this treaty with the above-mentioned order of proceedings, and if there are no means to deliver it in any other way. So the compilation of this mechanism and tools to ensure the protection of human rights allow us to interfere with the process at all the stages of the judgment until the verdict is delivered, and this is done on the part of the Russian Federation. The prosecutor's activity is focused on the protection of the rights of each individuals, and this is done in compliance with the rulings of ECHR in Strasbourg, and besides some politicized verdicts, some judgments have contributed greatly to the Institute of Human Rights Protection in Russia, and Mutman case has drawn our attention to the lawsuit and its connection with the budget allocations on the national and municipal levels. And after, in 2009, Budut case was adopted, and the compensation was provided and the reimbursement was delivered to the applicant. The first advanced case, Kalashnikov against Russia, was the last drop in this process. And in 2000, the detention facilities were upgraded in the course of the implementation of the new target programs. And in 2020, the ruling for Ananiev and others against Russian Federation was delivered. In 2019, the amendments were introduced into the respective federal law with the rights of defendant for the proper protection, and also the condition of the detentions were reconsidered, and the compensation was provided. The right for this compensation was exercised, and an applicant can go to court. The legislative norms have shown us the systemic problems, and we saw that reflected in the ruling. The Russian Federation recognizes the special treatment as for the interpretation of convention and the protocols if Russia infringes on some of the provisions. And I'd like to confirm that we comply with all the rulings and judgments of ECHR if it does not contradict the Russian Constitution. Besides the reimbursement of fair compensation based on Article 41, the General Prosecutor's Office of the Russian Federation interacts with the municipal bodies when in reinforcing the judgments and the verdicts in order to prevent those infringements in future. Now, the General Prosecutor's Office of Russia has the right to independently put forward some amendments and changes into the laws of the Russian Federation that are aimed at the improvement of the federal law. If judgments of ECHR requires that, and drawing some conclusions from this topic in protecting human rights and also the constitutional mechanism enforcement, we can state that now it has greatly changed, and we have now more extensive powers, and the role of prosecutor's office has changed, and we have to reconsider our view of prosecutor's office's activities. And at that, I'd like to conclude my speech, and now I'd like to continue our discussion, and I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Meyer. We all know him very well in various dimensions. He's the former judge in ECHR, and for many years He has had a very active viewpoint and positions, in some cases related to Russia, but also Mr. Meyer is the member of International Association of Prosecutors, and formerly he was a member of the Executive Committee of IAP, and now he is actively participating in their activities. So now I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Meyer.
Thank you, Chairman. My goodness, this is how I look like. You won't believe it. And for those who might think, oh gosh, all of a sudden we have a Strasbourg judge who's going to tell us what we should do, who doesn't understand anything about the prosecution service. Before I was elected a judge in the European Court, I was the Chief Advocate General at the Court of Appeal of Amsterdam, meaning that I've also had my years as a senior prosecutor at the Court of Appeal of Amsterdam and as a national judge. So I know a little bit about the daily work of the prosecutor, and as you can see, I've been 8 years in the court and can tell you more about that. Just one comment on the introduction by you, Chair. There are no politicized judgments of the European Court. I want to stress on that. The European Court does not take politics. The European Court does not do a one-judge vote. It's either a chamber of 7 and in appeal a chamber of 17 judges from the member states who make a judgment, and once a country is found in violation by a unanimous vote or by a substantial majority, be sure this has nothing to do with politicized judgments. I'd like to stress that. All right. First of all, I'd like to thank indeed the organizers, the Prosecutor General of Russia, the Council of Europe, and the International Association of Prosecutors for having organized this very important conference. It's a very important conference because indeed prosecutors and human rights are two connected issues, and it is very important to speak about that. I'm also very grateful, I must say, for the excellent paper you've all found in your conference papers, the excellent paper which gives a beautiful insight of the case law of the court and which gives very important also extra knowledge about the issue at stake. In the conference book, there is also a piece written by me. It was a little bit the outline of my speech. So for those who are too sleepy and who want to take a rest, you don't need to listen to me. You can always reread it or read it in the conference papers. But my message will be the protection of human rights is an issue where the public prosecutor has a very important role to play. And that's why I called my introduction Prosecutor, it is human rights on duty. Some others have also mentioned the same thing. Prosecutors and human rights are closely connected. You heard this morning the president of the CCPE, the Consultative Council of the European Prosecutors, and that CCPE adopted, and it was mentioned this morning, on the 19th of November 2020, so half a year ago, opinion number 15 concerning the role of prosecutors in emergency situations, in particular when facing a pandemic. And point 2 of the introduction, the purpose and scope of the opinion, reads, and now I quote, "An effective and autonomous prosecution service committed to upholding the rule of law and human rights in the administration of justice is one of the pillars in a democratic state. The responsibility of prosecutors to promote and strengthen the rule of law has many inherent aspects entailing significant challenges to prosecutors, and these challenges are particularly demanding in the context of emergency situations." Point 2 of the opinion makes it clear that the European Convention of Human Rights and the case law of the European Court of Human Rights, plus recommendations of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe, were leading in preparing that opinion. And you can find that opinion, number 15, also in this book. The book you got all with your papers, with all the case law of the court. Also opinion 15 has been put in this booklet. And at the European level of the resolutions of the Committee of Ministers on the role of the public prosecuting in criminal justice system and on the role of public prosecutors outside the criminal justice system, the last one from 2012, were leading in the elaboration of professional ethical standards of the prosecutor. And as you know, the Council of Europe was not the first to elaborate these standards. It was already done at the United Nations level in the UN guidelines on the role of prosecutors, dating from 1990. And it was also done by prosecutors themselves in the standards of the International Association of Prosecutors, IAP, in 1999. You can read about that also in the booklet in a piece written by the former president of the IAP, Nicholas Cowdery. And it's very important, these standards, the IAP standards, because they were written by prosecutors themselves from all over the world who said, these are the basic values of our profession, and we should keep to them. You can also see it in the European guidelines on ethics and conduct for public prosecutors, and on the opinions which ever since have been written and adopted by the CCPE. Because apart from number 15 from last year, there are opinions which really are very, very important when we speak about European norms and principles. I refer to, for instance, opinion number 9 from 2014 on European norms and principles concerning prosecutors, the so-called Rome Charter, and opinion number 13 on independence, accountability, and ethics of prosecutors. The resolutions, both at the United Nations level and at the Council of Europe level, plus the IAP standards, make a point of requiring prosecutors, in their exercise of their duties, to serve and protect the public interest, respect, protect, and uphold human rights, and uphold the rule of law. And of course, to do so in full accordance with the principles of legality, objectivity, fairness, and impartiality. And the Rome Charter contains the European norms and principles, mainly the norms that can be found in the European Convention on Human Rights and the case law of the court. And that Rome Charter makes it clear. Prosecutors contribute to ensuring that the rule of law is guaranteed, especially by the fair, impartial, and efficient administration of justice in all cases and at all stages of the proceedings within their competence. Prosecutors act on behalf of society and in the public interest to respect and protect human rights, as laid down in particular in the Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and the case law of the court. And the role and tasks of prosecutors, both within and outside the field of criminal justice, should be defined by law at the highest possible level and carried out in the strictest respect for the democratic principles and values of the Council of Europe. And I must admit that is quite a tall order, because all public servants are bound by these high standards in every society that claims to be civilized. And not only they, also a politician should abide by them. However, prosecutors in particular cannot escape their constraints because of their very particular status and its powers, which enable them to impact on the rights of ordinary citizens and even to wreck their lives. They have to be exemplary in every respect. If they fail to live up to the basic requirements of their office, then, as may happen with judges, they will cease to be credible when they prosecute other people for dishonest behavior, and society as a whole will lose confidence in them and will suffer as a result. What more can be said about the binding, because the norms in the European Convention are binding, and the case law of the European Court in relation to the prosecutor is also binding to the member states, to the 47 member states. What more can be said? What is important is to see that the European Court of Human Rights is at a minimum very demanding with regard to the independence of prosecutors. That should not lead to interpreting this requirement one of mistrust or even as a depreciation of the role of prosecutors. Quite the contrary. As Mr. André Potoczky, the judge who was elected in respect of France, held in Paris in 2018 before the network of prosecutors general of the Supreme Courts of the European Union, the prosecutor, I quote, who directs and controls the first phase of criminal proceedings is also and at the same time the advanced watchdog of human rights. And that's not all. When I searched on the word prosecutor on the website of the court, I got 705 results, not included what can be found in the case law of the court. And not without interest in all case law guides which are published by the court, which give you a beautiful survey of the case law of the court, prosecutors are mentioned. And in many fact sheets, which you can find also on the website of the court, prosecutors are mentioned. And in the daily work of a prosecutor in the criminal justice system, the main human rights tools are the rights laid down in Article 5, 6 and 7 of the Convention. When prosecuting a case, prosecutors should take care that they will uphold the procedural rights of suspects as laid down in Article 5, 6 and 7, which is the right to liberty, the right to a fair trial, and no punishment without law. And they also have a responsibility that they will not prosecute a case where evidence is obtained via unlawful methods, particularly where grave human rights violations took place, like the right not to be tortured, or even the right to respect for private and family life. And for a short update of that case law, I refer to the case law guides which you can find on the website of the court. There you can find all the information. So as far as that, my speech wasn't necessary because that's where you can find it. The prosecutor has a distinct role in deciding whether or not to prosecute. And the prosecutor should respect the principle of equality of arms between prosecution and the defense, not equality of arms at all costs. When I looked at the case law, I saw a case where someone from Turkey complained that the prosecutor had stood on a higher platform than the suspect, and he said that infringes my right to equality of arms. And then the court said, forget it. They did it a very distinct way, but they said, forget it. They declared it inadmissible. The prosecutor should disclose all evidence, all relevant evidence to the defense. Also the evidence which is in favor of the defense. They can't withhold it. That is part of the human rights on duty task of the prosecutor. It's not only the judge, it's also the prosecutor that should take care that a fair hearing can be guaranteed. And that you can all find summarized in the Rome Charter of the CCPE. And I dare say, when looking at the judgments of the court, where the court found a violation of Article 5, 6 and 7, in many of these cases, it's not only the judge at the national level, but in most of the cases, it's also the prosecutor who was co-responsible for that violation. It is certain that a prosecutor who, when prosecuting a case, goes out of his way to uphold human rights will not be able to quote universal popularity. The graver the crimes for which he must prosecute, the greater the public interest and the greater the clamor for tough action. And similarly, political office holders will not always appreciate the intervention of a prosecutor, demonstrating to them that human rights limit their room to maneuver. The less so if the special responsibilities of a prosecutor lead to a criminal investigation into cases of corruption or abuse of office of those same office holders who are suspected. Whoever seeks popularity above all, he should better choose another career than being a prosecutor. Moreover, human rights interests can be diametrically opposed to the wish to close an investigation as speedily as one might like. It is my opinion that the attributes of a prosecutor worth his salt should include a special form of courage, the courage to stick to the narrow path, if need, against the whim of the public or the self-interest of political leaders, the courage to cope with various pressures, political, social, and of public opinion, as well as the media and vested interest. And I do not mean that a prosecutor should exercise his duties as a human rights activist. Let that be reserved to the domain of others, including NGOs, whose work cannot be too highly praised. But I do mean to convey the message that a conscientious prosecutor will be aware that human rights on duty must guide him first and foremost. Thus, a prosecutor in prosecuting cases should be imbued with the sense of responsibility on a day-to-day basis. And I'm fully aware that's not an easy task to fulfill. And I refer to the very fact that the Executive Committee of the IEP felt a need in 2012 to make a protocol which regulates the way in which the IEP processes the request for assistance of prosecutors in difficulty. There has even been a standing committee established to respond to difficulties which confront prosecutors in particular situations. But there is more from the perspective of the European Court of Human Rights and the case law on the Convention. Actually, sometimes in the case law of the court, it is clear that the very fact of prosecuting a case may be demanded by human rights imperatives. In the case law of the court, there are many examples to be found, and this has to do with so-called positive obligations deriving from the Convention. The Convention says indeed, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. People have the right. But when, for instance, Article 2 is concerned, or the right to be not to be tortured, Article 3, and a person claims that he is tortured, or a person claims, the family of a person claims that he was killed by the hands of state agents, the prosecutor should do an immediate, impartial, and effective investigation to the reasons what has led to, for instance, the death of a person, or into the fact that the person claims to be tortured. That is a positive obligation for the prosecutor, a positive obligation which derives from Article 1 of the Convention, that all countries promised that they would secure to everyone within their jurisdictions the rights and freedoms of the Convention. So I also refer to the guidelines on the role of prosecutors, and I quote, "Prosecutors shall give due attention to the prosecution of crimes committed by public officials, particularly corruption, abuse of power, grave violations of human rights, and other crimes recognized by international law, and where authorized by law or consistent with local practice, the investigation of such offenders." It would, however, be a misunderstanding that only Article 5, Article 6, Article 7 are the rights which are important for prosecutors. And I have to admit, when I myself in 2002 was drafting the IEP Human Rights Manual for Prosecutors, I mainly paid attention to Article 5, 6 and 7. I didn't pay attention to other human rights which also have an impact on the daily work of a prosecutor. And there I mean indeed, rights as freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of religion. And I can assure you that in the revised edition, which has to appear in a couple of years, in the revised edition of the IEP Manual for Prosecutors, we will also deal with these other rights which are of importance. In the case law of the European Court of Human Rights, there are many cases in which human rights like freedom of expression, freedom of thought, conscience or religion, the freedom of assembly and association were violated, and where actually the national prosecutor who prosecuted the case at the domestic level and the judge who did the actual sentencing were to blame for that very violation. Cases in which opposition media were prosecuted and disproportionately sentenced for bringing news or commentaries which firmly criticize political office holders. Cases in which people opposed to the ruling political class were prosecuted and heavily sentenced for their verbal attacks on the attitudes and opinions of the ruling classes. Cases in which members of minority religions were attacked by followers of the majority religion. Cases in which around election time, opposition politicians were sentenced to short-time detention in order to prevent or discourage their participation in political rallies. Cases in which people taking part in a perfectly legal public demonstration were prosecuted for disturbing the public order on obviously fabricated arguments. And it's not my intention to name and shame any country concerned. Those who are interested can have a look at the website of the court. I only wish to indicate that, especially in cases where the freedom of expression, belief, association, and assembly of political opponents or of minority groups are at stake, the case law of the European Court clearly shows that prosecutors have not always shown the necessary sense of human rights awareness and or sometimes failed the test of courage. And from the articles in the Convention, it is clear that limitations on the freedom to manifest a religion, the freedom to hold an opinion, etc., may be justified, but only prescribed by law and if necessary for the protection of legitimate aims mentioned in the provisions of the Convention. And the very term necessary implies there must be a pressing social need to limit the basic rights. And the fact that whoever happens to be in power considers such limitations convenient is definitely not sufficient as a justification. After all, classical human rights law is as much about protecting the individuals against the power of state as anything else. It does not mean that the prosecutor should never prosecute a case directed against the media. It does not mean that the prosecutor should never prosecute a case where demonstrations are held. But the prosecutor should always be aware that talking about freedom of expression, talking about freedom of association, talking about the freedom to convene, to demonstrate, you should see, is there a legitimate aim to limit the freedom? Is it proportionate what we are doing when we are limiting these cases? And what is important is that a prosecutor, and I'm just quoting the case law of the court, before taking the decision whether or not to prosecute media or whether or not to prosecute people who have demonstrated, should always carefully consider all relevant human rights implications. And as I said, similar considerations apply to the other rights in the Convention. For those who might think that the European Court itself is sometimes too much a human rights activist, that is, I can say, ridiculous. The European Court has been set up, and now I quote the Convention, to ensure the observance of the engagements undertaken by the high contracting parties. And the jurisdiction of the Court, again, according to the Convention, applies to all matters concerning the interpretation and application of the Convention. So not just the way the Convention is applied at the national level, the Court also has the right to interpret. And indeed, to interpret the Convention is done, and I don't have to explain this to a group of lawyers, has to be done according to international standards. And these are the standards laid down in the Vienna Treaty on the interpretation of international treaties. Because that's typical for lawyers. You say, well, you have the right to interpret, and then you lay down in a law how you should mean to interpret, and you lay down all the means of interpretation. The Vienna Convention as such is very important. And when you try to argue, yes, but doesn't the court go too far, or, as I said at the beginning, is it too politicized? It's interesting to see that it's the 47 member states themselves who, in many declarations on the court, on the future of the court, has said, and I now refer to the last one in 2018, it says, it's the court which provides a safeguard for violations that have not been remedied at the national level. It's the court which authoritatively interprets the Convention in accordance with relevant norms and principles of international law. And the quality and particularly the clarity and consistency of the court's judgments are important for the authority and effectiveness of the Convention system. They also add the principle of subsidiarity, which continues to develop and evolve in the court's case law, guides the way in which the court conducts its review. And it was mentioned by Christos Giannimopoulos, indeed, on the 1st of August, next August, in a couple of weeks' time, Protocol 15 will enter into force, Protocol 15 to the Convention. And Protocol 15 also lays down that indeed it should be done at a national level. human rights should be upheld at the national level. That is the principle of subsidiarity. And if everything goes the way it should go, then indeed the court can declare all complaints inadmissible. By now, the court, in 95% of the cases, still will declare a complaint inadmissible. There are many people who complain that the court is much too critical and thus is much too lenient to governments. The court is not. The court is strict in applying and interpreting. But in 5% of the cases which are taken to Strasbourg, indeed the court has to say, yes, something went wrong. And now I conclude. Human rights should be upheld at the national level. And there, the public prosecutor has a very important role to play. The public prosecutor has the role as human rights on duty because of their very particular status, because of the powers they have, which enable them, and I repeat myself now, to impact on the rights of ordinary citizens and even to wreck their lives. They have to be exemplary in every respect. And that's why it's so good that we at this conference also talk about what is exactly the role of human rights in the daily work of the prosecutor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Meyer. It's a very interesting overview of the role of prosecutor's office, taking into consideration a new function of the Russian prosecutor's office. A lot has to be taken into consideration. And now I'd like to give the floor to the General Prosecutor's Office from Italy, Mr. Salvi. Please, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I wish to express the sincerest greetings on behalf of the Minister of Justice of Italian Republic, Honorable Marta Cartabia. I join her in greeting you today, especially the International Association of Prosecutors and Council of Europe, and particularly the perfect organization of the Prosecutor General Office of Russian Federation that was able to join the efficiency to the warmth. So thank you very much for this occasion. The challenges from epidemic emergency contributed to enhance the complex role of prosecutors in ensuring the protection of rights and the uniform implementation of the law. The growing demand for justice and the new transnational forms of organized crime require an adequate organization of prosecuting offices, cooperation and integration between different legal systems. This expansion rightly entails that the public opinion shows a growing consideration for the principle of independence of prosecuting service, the respect for procedural guarantees and the attention to public interest, not only in the prosecution of crimes, but also in the participation to civil actions concerning minors, disabled people, migrants, and other vulnerable subjects. The conference represents an occasion to reknote the threads of cooperation, exchange of experiences, knowledge and trust between people and institutions. Mutual trust is a key word, often stressed in the decisions issued by the Human Rights European Court as grounded in the rule of the law respect. As pointed out by the President of the Strasbourg Court, the rule of law is the lodestar of the European Convention, illuminating every other principle. I would like to underline 3 points, leaving to our written presentation some more detailed explication. My first point concerns the topic of independence of prosecution service and each single members of the body. The guarantee of independence of prosecution services is strictly linked to the care of a public interest and equality of citizens before the law. It is part of the rule of law. The second point concerns the procedural aspects. The tenure of the prosecution service as justice body does not only come from its formal independence, but also from the procedures where it intervenes, both in criminal and civil procedures. What is written on the charters must live in the praxis, and such correspondence should be checked day by day. As a consequence, and finally, I reckon how important it is a compliance with the principle established by the case law of supranational courts, the Strasbourg Court and the UE Court of Justice for the countries involved. After the thorough presentation of Judge Myler, my task is much more easy. The independence is not granted once and forever. It faces continuous challenges. In Italy, for example, several constitutional provisions granted the independence of the prosecution body. Among them, of the utmost importance is penal action as mandatory. But the de facto discretionary power imposed by the high number of crimes has long been a matter of debate. Hence, the need for using the few resources in accordance with general criteria. Therefore, here comes the question whereby public prosecutors are accountable for their choices and how accountability can deal with independency. Each system, whatever the structure, faces similar problems. We have to be aware of these differences and identify hard core of guarantees deep down in the legal system and the procedure for the safeguard of the real independence of prosecution service from the other powers. Such a prosecutorial model requires a strong, autonomous judge who can exercise a real and effective control on the penal action. All this avoids an arbitrary exercise of prosecution, for example, by the abuse of overcharging or concealment of criminal reports in registry of convenience. According to the principles outlined in the European Convention, independence as the prerequisite for impartiality is a right for everyone, and at the same time, a prerogative for the judge and the prosecutor, whom we should consider as an individual and as belonging to a body, corpus. The interconnection between the two aspects is well expressed in the opinions of the Consultative Council of European Judges. Independence, they said, united to impartiality, is a concept we can look from the bright side when we consider a number of safeguards concerning the status. We can also look at it from the black side when we consider the lack of unduly pressures outside or inside the judicial system. The safeguards concern access, immovability, career progression, relocation, promotions, training, disciplinary system, the presence of a self-governing body with adequate powers of regulation and protection. The Strasbourg Court sent a strong message against political intervention in the administration of justice on the occasion of the judgment relating to the case involving Ms. Laura Kövesi, now appointed as European Chief Prosecutor. In its judgment, the court stated inter alia that continuity in the profession against the anticipated retirement and dismissal dismissal, and the safeguard against disciplinary proceedings are of the utmost importance in granting independence. A few months ago, the court stressed again the importance of fairness in disciplinary proceedings against the judges and the prosecutors. Our concern grows when penal and disciplinary proceedings affect the judiciary by the hundreds. The statements contained in the charters can be undermined by the complexity of the real implementation of these principles. In fact, they live in ordinary laws, substantive laws, and the procedures as much as in statutes. They mostly live in the praxis and institutional relations. The written statements may not be implemented, and the roads to independence may be different depending on the history of different countries. Nevertheless, over the centuries, diverse European systems benefited from mutual relations and borrowed from each other. As highlighted by the Consultative Council for the Prosecutor, the report 2019, today there are probably no pure systems which have not imported other important elements from outside. Mutual trust is the basis for cooperation. It should be grounded on the respect of the rule of law. Fundamental part of the rule of law is the respect due to the decisions of the court, especially when concerning the independence of the judiciary as a whole. The independence of prosecutors and their role as tutors of fundamental rights are challenged when sensitive issues are at the stake. A democratic political system is grounded on freedom of expression and on political opponents' safety. Great economic interests can conditioning the efficiency of legal proceeding. Vulnerable persons should be safeguarded as well as imposed inter alia by the Lanzarote and Istanbul Council conventions. In very recent days, an Italian prosecutor office concluded an investigation about violence against inmates after a rioting in a prison caused by the widespread worries for COVID contagions. Tens of policemen have been prosecuted and some of them jailed. We are not proud for the necessity of an investigation. Violence against inmates is a serious fault for the safeguard of human rights. But we are sure that the investigation will be carried out in the full respect of the guarantees of everyone, without considering the status of the victims and of the defendants. In these very days, the Italian Constitutional Court, voiding constitutional validity to legal provisions about imprisonment of journalists, gave respect to a Strasbourg court decision about freedom of expression. This is precisely the kind of test we are talking about, how a judicial system reacts when sensitive interests are involved. The protection of freedom of speech and of journalists as watchdogs of the democracy is a fundamental role for prosecutors. Even when the national security is at the stake, the rule of law should be respected. To be clear, it is exactly when states' sensitive interests are involved that the protection of individual rights must be effective. Independent prosecution is a precondition. The test is not an easy one, and it might be unwelcomed by the nation who has to bear it. But it is precisely reciprocity that makes it acceptable. Excuse me. In this respect, initiative like this forum represent precious occasions to promote dialogue and sharing of best practices in a wide range of sectors. Therefore, we look forward to continuing our work under the aegis of the Council of Europe. Preparing the next forum could be the way to keep open the dialogue between us. In May 2022 will occur the 30th anniversary of the killing of Giovanni Falcone, the bombing of Capaci by Cosa Nostra, a paradigmatic mafia organization. Giovanni Falcone was a judge and in the last part of his life, a prosecutor. Is a figure that serves a special memory in this international symposium, not only for his contribution to the fight against organized crime, but also for his great innovations in the investigative work and modes of international cooperation. He was one of the fathers of the UN Palermo Convention. Next May could therefore be a good chance to continue our discussion under the Italian presidency of the Council of Europe, maybe in Palermo. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое, господин Сальви.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salvi. Now I would like to get another presentation. It will be video conference. It will be Anatoly Kolyar, the ex-judge on behalf of Russian Federation in European Court on Human Rights. Many think that Anatoly Ivanovich was the very first judge on behalf of Russian Federation in the court, but it's not exactly so. He is number one, but he's number two, but number one, a new updated format of the European Court on Human Rights, and he has been exercising his functions throughout 13 plus years, and he made a very important and indispensable contribution into the development of legal system of Russian Federation by representing Russia in Strasbourg and remaining independent. Thank you very much. Mikhail, can you hear me on video conference? Yes, you can see me, you can hear me, I hope. Thanks a lot. Dear colleagues, I'm privileged to participate in the conference, although it's a shame I cannot be here and hug my good old friend of mine, Egbert Moyer, and we had lots of cases in Strasbourg, and Russian friends, your faces are covered by masks, but it's not the Venetian tradition, it's not a Venice carnival, unfortunately, not a Venice Mardi Gras. I am here to underscore the fact that the subject matter we have been discussing is of extreme importance, practice-wise and theory-wise. So I would like to highlight one issue. On which conditions prosecutor's office associates are eligible to participate in European Court on Human Rights. There is the document for the standards of professional liabilities and duties, main duties and rights of prosecutors devised by International Association of Prosecutors. At Cape Town Annual Conference, IAP, a year after, convened the Forum of IAP on Human Rights. That way, human rights is in the limelight of attention. This is official strategic task for prosecutors community. Although law enforcement, legal function, and human rights and protection function are for the prosecutor's office. Albert and other international high-level executives refer to the fact that prosecutors are acting on behalf of the society at large to protect rights and freedoms of people the way they are described in the Convention on Human Rights and case law of European Court on Human Rights. That way we span the bridge between European Court on Human Rights and practices of European Court of Human Rights. As to the implementation of this function and practice, would transcend the boundaries of criminal prosecution and protection of defendants' rights. The final document of the Forum and Legal Conference of 2008 also made its contribution into that. Venetian Commission and European Court on Human Rights initially were a bit disconcerted by extension of prosecutors' powers in extrajudicial way. For VC, it meant the reproduction of the so-called Soviet model of prosecutors' supervision, encroaching upon executive and other authorities, and at the end of the day, the violation of division of powers according to Montesquieu. Although Mikhail Martin, a Russian scientist, has maintained that this concept is not implementable up to 100% elsewhere, period. It's just been quoted, but amid real processes underwent, which are independent in many countries, and also the approaches of Venetian Commission now are more flexible, and Claire Basimov mentioned that as well. Nonetheless, Venetian Commission was maintaining that any actions of prosecutor impacting freedoms, human rights, should be under the supervision of competent courts. The attitude of European Court on Prosecutor's Office and human rights protective activities has been evolving and updating as yet, as my colleague and friend Egbert Meyer was saying. Egbert, I'm going to refer to what you say pretty often. In 2008, he said, yes, I remember everything, every word you said, Egbert. Big Brother is watching you. So he was speaking about the independent and impartial tribunal, or the prosecutors, European Court on human rights was against that. The fact that prosecutors were acting as protectors of public interests could not give them the status of independent and impartial participants of the process. That was in one of the cases of versus Turkey, and also according to the court opinion, it's not the same status of prosecutors as the court. It's McKay versus UK, Treaser versus Switzerland, Absina versus Bulgaria, and another cases. As to the prosecutors' offices of the former Soviet socialist countries, there were lots of problems due to the competences of prosecutor to turn to court in the way of supervision to demand the reversal of enforced court judgment. It was the high-profile case Bromorescu versus Romania. It was the title of ownership for the apartment, and at the end of the day, prosecutor demanded the reversal of enforced court judgment about illegitimate nature of deprivation of the property according to the decree of Communist Romania in favor of law. He demanded, and the law was entitling him to demand the reversal of any court judgment, provided the court overexceeded its jurisdiction. On the basis of the Article 330, the prosecutor demanded that the court would reverse the first instance court ruling, and the court obediently reversed that judgment. And it's in this resolution, a European Court on Human Rights was maintaining that this right of prosecutor is unlimited in time, so such court rulings can be challenged and contested forever. So there was the violation of Article 6, paragraph 1st of right to fair trial. Ludmila Kalnilovich versus Russian Federation, another case. It was the judgment of national judge. And by that time, Mr. Tumanov stepped down, and I didn't step in my position. I was not yet encumbered, and prosecutors' supervision was considered to be ineffective remedy in that particular case versus Russian Federation, and that complaint was held ineligible, and the complaint in the order of supervision depends on the discretionary powers of executives, or to make it more clear, European Court recognized only those remedies, only court remedies which could be used by citizens on their own, and it should not depend on the discretion of the judges or prosecutors. That was the interpretation of Article 13 of the Convention, was severely rebuked and criticized by many jurists because it's absolutized only court remedies, inclusive of appeal and cassation as the final stage, and excluded from the civil process the prosecutor. But in point of fact, it's fair to say that European Court admitted that it's possible for a prosecutor to participate in the spheres which are outside the legal proceedings, because it was important to refer to the equality of arms and also to have adversarial nature of the process in court. And it was very important to emphasize the principle of equity of arms, because such an executive officer as prosecutor, when they would like to reverse this appeal, so that way they're taking sides, and otherwise, if they are not taking sides, they can participate proactively or implicitly or explicitly. But the equity of rights principle is violated, like Lully France versus France 2003 case, or commercial disputes or disputes in Constitutional Court of Spain, for example, where by in absence of the claimant, public prosecutor was the last to comment on his position. Ruiz Mateos versus Spain, 1993 case. As to the post-Soviet space countries or post-socialist countries, the principle of legal certainty is important. When the court's judgment was just fundamental error, so court was finding the violations of Article 6 of Convention, irrespective of, I underscore, irrespective of who initiated that review. The higher instance court, like Rebich versus country, or prosecutor Rosetrans versus Russia, or CETA versus Moldova. Since 2009, this position of European Court of on Human Rights just turned around some of the activities. There were lots of petitions and complaints out of Russia, but first I would like to refer to the conference of 2008, second, about the role of prosecutors in protection of public interests and human rights in extrajudicial sphere. Egbert, you were part of it, by the way, and Egbert impacted drastically the court's position. And in that brief document, European prosecutors responded to the previously manifested concerns of the European Court about prosecutors entering civil, administrative, and remedial procedures. They reassured the court by saying that they would adhere to rule of law and fair trial and fair justice. The conference underscored the necessity for our society to have effective protection of the rights of vulnerable groups, minors, young people, disabled people, witnesses, and also social and economic rights of the people. And the conference made a clear stand that prosecutors can play a very important role here. And that was the case. Bezhalov versus Russia, and European Court's ruling was more merciful. Menchinska versus Russia case, January 2009. European Court maintained that the support of one of the parties by prosecutor could be justified in specific circumstances, like to protect the rights of vulnerable groups or when it's necessary to protect public interest. That's important as well.
And it also included the opinion of the Venice Commission, what was in regards to the prosecutor's office, what was mentioned by Ms. Mallory in the morning. And this opinion of the Venice Commission recognized the presence of the prosecutor in the process if there is a justified goal in it. And it was also mentioned that the prosecutors could have the right to protect the rights of the state. So we can say that ECHR used the groundwork of the Venice Commission and its opinion. So we saw the synergy and the interaction, and I think that it was a very fruitful process indeed. And going back to the case of Menchinska, where the prosecutor challenged the judgment and that it was a mistake for the unemployment reimbursement that was not paid, and it was claimed that the prosecutor's office should not have intervened into these proceedings, especially in the Ministry of Finance. They say the same thing, that they do not have money and they will not help in that. So the ECHR claimed that the right for the equal rights were infringed upon, and we could say that it took some time for ECHR, the judgment, and it said that the prosecutor influenced this judgment, and the principle of the fair trial was violated, and the more flexible approach was demonstrated in the case Basanina versus Russia in May 2009. I think it was a historic ruling, and with Mr. Meyer, we participated in it, and it was about getting the applicant out of her flat, and according to the contract, it was the flat was sold, and the employee of the Institute of Oceanography was left without without her apartment. So it was about the examination of the transaction, and it was a citizen that was deprived of his right to have this flat, and the court did not find any infringement of Article 6, and the court provided a detailed examination and a reference to the respective document, and it delivered the verdict that the case was not necessarily examined in the right way, and the claimant has had an opportunity to have her lawyer with her, and as a participant of this proceeding, I can add that the prosecutor from Gelendzhik, from Krasnodarsky region, was quite pedagogical. The practice of manipulation of apartments in this resort zone, it was quite widespread event, and a criminal case was initiated after that. So we see that in each case, ECHR, the intervention of prosecutor is considered by the causal examination, and they did examine that in detail. And in Tyler case against Great Britain in 1978, the court chose the interpretation of this case, and it emerged and it evolved with time when we talk about the role of the prosecutor's office, and we can hope that in the nearest future those states that have not enshrined that in their legislation and will expand the powers of prosecutor's office in other ambits and spheres as well. Thank you. Thank you, Anatoly Ivanovich. And now I'd like to give the floor to General Prosecutor from Republic of Armenia, Mr. Davtyan. Please, the floor is yours. Dear colleagues, distinguished colleagues, on behalf of the General Prosecutor's Office of the Republic of Armenia and myself, I'd like to welcome you at the conference Role of Prosecutor's Office in Protection of Individual Rights and Public Interests in the light of the requirements of the European Convention on Human Rights. Before going directly to the topic of my speech, I'd like to extend my gratitude to organizers headed by Mr. Krasnov. Thank you for organizing this conference at such high level under the post-pandemic circumstances we are living in, and I'd like to wish all of us fruitful and productive work, and I'm confident that the results of the this conference will help us to foster the processes and will extend the powers in order to eradicate crimes and criminal infringements in all the states. Today's event is taking place at the Palace of Congresses, and it's quite symbolic indeed. As we all know, the idea to open a residence of the Russian vassals came up to Peter the Great, and his order in 1722, the general prosecutor's role was introduced, and when it was established, the goal was to diminish or to eradicate evil that comes from injustice, disorders, bribery, and outlawry. And In this light, today's event is quite symbolic with time. The role of prosecutor's office as the main subject to protect states and citizens' rights has not weakened, but it has increased actually many times, and the high mission of the prosecutor's office as the main body that protects the rights of citizens and state is multidimensional, and it has many aspects. But today I will draw your attention only to part of this work. Together with combating crime, the priority activities of the prosecutor's office is to protect the rights of citizens and ensuring the right for privacy and for freedom. And these issues related to this sphere is one of the priority for the prosecutor's office in the Republic of Armenia. And now I'd like to present you some of the aspects. So we have studied the practice of ECHR throughout the years, and we see that the established practice should be reconsidered, and we have to work out certain criteria in accordance with Article number 5 of the European Convention on Human Rights. The Prosecutor's Office of the Republic of Armenia recognized the need to include unified criteria in law enforcement practice when we deal with the motion and request of the detention. And we have carried out a large-scale analysis of the applicable legislation and legislation in power, and also the established practices. As a result of this analysis, we took certain steps in this regard based on the analysis of the legal principles. We formulated specific criteria for those motions of the detention.
Taken in custody as they restrained. Also, when it was taken in custody of the defendants in relation to which the previous restraint was not related to taking in custody, and those restraints were changed due to exculpatory circumstances related to the prosecution, and motions were sent in due to the strictness of the expected punishment. There were a special requirement identified for a motion giving the grounds to introduce such a motion. It was established that in substantiating the fact of application of the impact upon the persons participating in criminal proceedings and hampering the court proceedings, it's necessary to refer to the position of the defendant, the former position of the defendant, and public position and social also social connections which could have adverse impact upon the proceedings. Also, it's inadmissible to send a motion to extend the incarceration period based on unsubstantiated evidence. It's necessary to say that there are some very positive outcomes related to that. There are good statistical indicators, but it is very important to say that analysis of the statistical data is indicative of the fact that, first, there are much less instances when motions are sent for taking in custody which are not in compliance with the above-mentioned criteria. Another positive aspect is the predominant number of satisfied motions when the restraint is taken in custody, provided all the criteria are complied with. Positive changes and developments in this sphere were highly appreciated by the representatives of civil society. Because for them it's very important to put into unwelcome limelight sometimes the cases when it was illegitimate restraint as taking in custody. Another thing, confrontation when motions of competent authorities of other states are set in motion for criminal prosecution. Sometimes there is the violation of European Convention Article number 6 about the protection of the basic liberties and freedoms of people. There is a case when citizens of Republic of Armenia are there and the defendants are in the territory of the other country, so it's not possible to have the confrontation between the defendants and those who witnessed against them. International treaties envisage the procedure when there is a summon up of the other bodies to the court. Nonetheless, the appearance in court of all the parties to a trial, the defendant and the witness, should be voluntary. So there are no basic grounds to bring them forcefully. There could be criminal liability for acts which had been committed prior to crossing the border of the state in relation to those persons, and the evidence or conclusions as experts in criminal proceeding, which is the subject of criminal procedure. It ensues from this that the truth of their evidence could be contested. Of course, it's possible to have a video conference. It's envisaged by a second addendum protocol of European Convention on Mutual Legal Aid in Criminal proceedings, but not all the member countries joined up with this protocol. The ability to use video conferences, video records, and other technical means has been envisaged by Geneva Convention of 2002, but the procedure of its enforcement should be regulated by the legislations of the contracting states, whereas not all the CIS countries envisage the procedure of using video conference to summon up the witnesses for evidence. One way or the other, this is envisaged by national legislations of member states. I think that general norms of international treaties regulating conduction of investigation will make it possible to use video conferences for witnesses, evidences. It would be great if we share best practices with our colleagues and partners when we counter crime and protect human rights in criminal proceedings. That's it. Thank you. Thank you very much, Artur. You raised a very important issue. These are quite tangible problems. We'll give it a thought. I would like to give the floor to Prosecutor General from Belarus, Andrei Chmyslov. Floor is yours. Distinguished colleagues, in international documents and judgments in different cases, it has been repeatedly underscored that genocide is one of most disgusting and awful crimes. It should be also rebuked because those who refer to this crime exterminate whole nations. Unfortunately, in some countries, they start forgetting war crimes of Nazi Germany and its henchmen, when criminal activities didn't have such a high scope as now, though. I'm here to remind you some facts. Waging World War II and assaulting Russia according to Barbarossa's plan, the leadership of Germany developed documents whereby military crimes were embedded into state policies, in particular the provisions on special jurisdiction which was published in May 1941, envisaged massive extermination of Soviet peaceful population. Within Barbarossa's plan, Oldenburg Plan was developed. To execute that plan, it was meant that there was the total withdrawal and delivery to Germany, museum entries, foodstuffs, monuments of culture, ammunition. Even black earth soil was scooped up by excavators, dredged and brought to Germany. The practice of suffocating nations is here again as sanctions policies. The rules of treating military soldiers, they were to be exterminated. There was this secret directive of the Navy headquarters, which prescribed that the gem of architecture, Leningrad, was to be erased from planet Earth, and all the population was to be exterminated. Within the implementation of Ostplan in USSR, the extermination of the local population started, although plan envisaged to use all the power of extermination after the World War II was completed. Within its implementation, about 3 million Soviet prisoners of war were exterminated. Peaceful population was also exterminated in the territory of contemporary Belarus. Back then, more than 140 large punitive operations were conducted. 10,000 settlements were destroyed fully. In World War times, there was a forceful deportation for forced labor works of more than 400,000 citizens. Most of them died in Europe. In Belarus itself, back then, more than 400 places of forced detention of population was there. 260 camps of death and 170 ghetto, which all told exterminated 1.5 million people. In Trostenets concentration camp, more than 200,000 people were exterminated. Up till now, the exact number of the victims and their personalities were not identified. Ad hoc commissions studying the burial identified the tentative number of victims based on the amount of ash remained after the incineration of the dead bodies.
So overall, to the date over the years of German occupation, the losses in civilians amounted to almost 3 million people, about 1/3 of the population. And as it was stated quite justly by Mr. Sukharev, the judgment of Nuremberg laid the foundation of the contemporary phenomenon of the freedom of people, and the judgment of the tribunal at the UN, the principle of the humanitarian law, is safeguarding the peaceful freedoms of citizens. Together with that, in spite of some evident cases that we see, only part of Nazi criminals were deemed responsible for that, for those crimes committed on the territory of Belarus, and about 400 of them still live in the countries around the world, and this circumstance gives us a foundation that actually do away with the general values, and we have to restore the historic justice, and that is why the investigation committee of the Republic of Belarus is now conducting the investigation of genocide and deportation, also the concentration camps establishment. In order to investigate it, we established a group that includes prosecutors and investigators from the investigation of Belarus, and the heads of law enforcement agencies have all the necessary mechanisms and tools to investigate those crimes properly. And we have the scientific support that is rendered by the researchers and scientists specializing in the Second World War history, and they are working quite closely with different documents from the archives, and the mechanism of investigation is the following. The researchers and scientists, together with the representatives of law enforcement agencies, taking evidence and from the witnesses and with the specialists of the museum, they state the fact of the extermination of citizens and people, and also there is an examination of those places where these people were shot. Subsequently, they are trying to do the excavation in those places in order to find the remains of them, and the first actions have shown that the scale of the tragedy of Belarusian people is much more than we expected before. And one of those places of massive extermination is on Logoysk region, and only there the number of children, women, and senior population that were exterminated is much more than it was stated before. And it's a frightening sight, and more than 500 people's remains were found there, and the age was from 4 to 70 years, and at the moment of shooting, some of the people were laid down on their face, and even for experienced prosecutors and researchers were overwhelmed seeing this picture of a woman holding a child and being shot in the head. In the course of the ballistic examination, the shells were examined, and these were manufactured on the plants in Poland and in Germany from 1935 to 1943, and these were used in various types of weapons, from, for example, pistols of 9 millimeters. In the framework of this criminal proceedings. We are examining the facts of the death at concentration camps, and we have had evidence from 3,000 witnesses, and it was stated that in winter a lot of people died because of cold, and there were no sanitary requirements complied with, and some of people were killed there by the guards. They had to work for 12 to 14 hours per day. It was devastating labor, and we also analyzed the situation in Azarich concentration camp. It was opened in 1944. It was located on Kalinsky region of Gomel, and it included 3 parts. Azarich concentration camp, that is the name it is known by. 5,000 people were detained there, and many people were killed there in the swarms, and the approaches to the concentration camp were mined, and they had to remove clothes from children and from corpses in order to survive, and these facts are confirmed by the evidence that was given by the witnesses, and they suffered from different diseases. And one of the former prisoner elaborated on the situation and described the atrocities that they lived through, and the Nazi were getting dogs to attack the children. And one of this witness said that after she was liberated from there, her weight was about only 10 kilos. And there were also some atrocities done with the teeth of prisoners, and we saw some facts in the judgment of Nuremberg tribunal, and the reimbursement and the compensation was not provided, and it is necessary to ensure the rights of all the prisoners of concentration camps and their relatives. And in general, I can say that besides the well-known extermination sites, 84 other sites were found, and about 3,500 bodies were found, and the overall losses during the Great Patriotic War, the Second World War, will be much more than the initial figures that we had. And one of the directions of the investigation is finding out the real damage, and we need to provide the compensation to those who were prisoners at the concentration camps. And the result of investigation, we will address the international organizations in order to recognize the fact of the genocide and extermination. And I'd like to particularly note that in the genocide of peaceful population, different groups from nationalists from Ukraine, Latvia, and Lithuania participated in the process. In 1941, in Minsk region, about 10,000 people were exterminated, and it was stated that a lot of troops participated in the same operations in 1942. In 1943, the punitary operation was carried out, and its goal was to create the dead territory, the dead soil along the boundary of Latvia. With the width of 30 kilometers and the length of 40 kilometers. In the course of this operation, 13,000 civilians were killed and 387 localities were exterminated in village of Brodovici, including women and children, and trying to save their lives. They went out of their homes, but the troops killed them anyway by shooting them. And another 114 settlements were incinerated, and another punitary operation, the Feast of Spring, carried out in 1944. The guerrilla of Belarus, also police troops from Latvia participated in that, and you see the special atrocities that happened there, and hundreds of bodies of women and children were found there, and we killed them in order to exterminate more Russian people. This is the quotation. In early May, in Kabinki, in early May of 1944, the witnesses saw about 3,000 bodies of old people, women, and children. And now we are examining this territory. In this criminal case, we have the information that on the territory of Lithuania, Great Britain, and the U.S., still alive. And now we are trying to find out whether they participated in those operations. And we also have the lists of the punitive troops from Lithuania and Latvia. And here we talk about hundreds of people. We are trying to verify whether they are still alive and where they live now. And then we will submit our application to the respective bodies to find out whether they have something to do with it. In the course of the international cooperation, we sent our motion to render us aid in the process, and when we get the information about the participation of these people, the norms will be applied in accordance with the international legislation, and they will be held responsible for those crimes. Thus, the investigation of Belarusian genocide in the course of the Second World War is to honor the memory of those who perished during this time, and it is aimed at protecting the rights and freedoms of Belarusian people. And this is the public trial, and it is very important for our citizens and for descendants. Anti-fascist principles should be applied never again. And we used to think that it was history, but the new reality shows us that we should not forget our past, and we will inform all the international institutes and also prosecutor generals of European states, and we will we will state the confirmed facts, and will send this information to those bodies and those agencies, and we will demonstrate the connection between Nazi criminals with those crimes that were committed on the territory of Belarus. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Andrei Ivanovich. So the victims of the war and of Nazism should not be forgot, and we should learn our lessons. We should search for Nazi criminals. The Russian prosecutor's office is taking an active part in the investigation, and we are using all the channels that we have, and the extradition activities are also carried out, no matter where these criminals can be found. And now I'd like to give the floor to the Prosecutor General of the Republic of Moldova, Mr. Stoyanoglu. He will join us online. Thank you, Mikhail. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you well. Okay, thank you very much again. First of all, I'd like to extend my gratitude for the invitation and for this opportunity to deliver my speech in this event. Unfortunately, I could not attend this event, but we think that it is very important. So that was due to some political events. This weekend we have parliamentary elections, and I had to stay in my country to supervise all those processes. And now I'd like to tell you some words in terms of our activities, how we protect human rights in Moldova. Back in 1997, the Republic of Moldova ratified the Convention on Human Rights and some additional protocols to it. And this helped us to re-evaluate our approach, and we also changed our criminal and procedural law, and we introduced some amendments into our legislation. The preliminary detention, taken into custody, and the different measures and the challenging procedures that can be used there. In criminal law, we have a new list of crimes, the tortures, and different types of the detention. Starting from the 1st of August 2016, in Republic of Moldova, we adopted a new law, and when working it out, we took into consideration the opinions of the Venice Commission and the European Council of European Prosecutors and guidelines of the Council of Europe. And from this moment, the authorities, the powers were limited.
They were confined to criminal proceeding, not filing the motions were provided for other state institutions. Prosecutor's Office of Moldova is part of judicial authority concentrated on the presentation of the prosecution in court. As to the criminal procedural law, at the national level, the role of prosecutor in guaranteeing compliance with the law is decisive. Article 2, European Convention guarantees the right to life of any person. Also, there are main articles of convention, and together with Article 3, and there are no deviations from that. According to the national legislation on homicide cases, prosecutor is just at the head of the prosecution and presents public prosecution in court. The competence of criminal proceedings, prosecution is given to police, and prosecutors might also participate in that in some cases. Positive obligations of the state could be considered from two angles, from the procedural and legal part. When it's homicide cases, all the measures should be identified, done in exercise to identify the culprit, and so that the punishment would be inevitable. In Moldova, there are very few cases which were sent to European Court on Human Rights. Nonetheless, their impact is very strong. For example, European Court identified ineffective investigation in case of car accidents related to death tolls of the victims, whereby it was at the national level, it was the acquittal. Criminal Procedural Code of Moldova provides for the procedural decision via review and revision position of national proceedings, so that European Court of Human Rights states the breach of rights guaranteed by European Convention. Among the first judgments in Moldova related to the violation of state authorities, Article 2 ban on torture. Criminal code was updated in 2012 about different other elements of the crime, like defamation, torture, and such cases are just filed by prosecutors in cases of torture or inhuman and treatment and defamation. And of course, there could be methodological support in investigation of certain corpus delicti. And there are special bodies dealing with this category of cases. With that same aim, also measures were taken on board to improve the conditions for inmates in penitentiary places. Despite there are some problems here, recently the situation has changed for better. Alongside with that, there are some indemnity mechanisms which are now envisaged by criminal procedural codes. So court instances could reduce the sentence over 10 days of being in detention in undue conditions. If it was the stage of pretrial detention, for example, and they were kept in undue conditions, there are indemnity measures provided. Regarding Article 5, European Convention envisages the limitation of a freedom of a person under the compliance with specific conditions. That way, Article 5 of the ECR maintains that it's possible to take the person in custody if there are suspicions that the crime was made. According to national legislation, only the judge, on based of the motion of a prosecutor, could identify this restraint as taken in custody. But everything should be done in compliance with the criminal procedural code in order to support the motion. Constitutional Court of Moldova Republic in February 2016 identified as unconstitutional articles. So, all told, at the stage of court proceedings and investigation of court detention should not exceed 30 days. The motion of prosecutors to exceed 3 months in detention at pretrial. And so it should be decided at the highest level in the prosecutor's service. This norm or interpretation of the Constitutional Court was tested by time, but oftentimes the right to protection sometimes is abused, and there is the procrastination of the case in court, and oftentimes drug dealers and murderers and felons and other criminals are acquitted when they are in detention for more than 12 months in pretrial part. So the Constitution should be amended so that felons should be prosecuted, and it would not be possible for them to avoid criminal prosecution. This guarantee is complied with when there is the home arrest. The European Court criticizes Moldova state, mindful of unsuccess, a very low level of motivations for the motion of the prosecutors to extend the pre-trial arrest taken in custody or home arrest. They could be challenged in the higher instance court. In criminal cases which are tried by a court, when there are different decisions about the restraint measure should not be contested. This prerogative is only possible at the stage of criminal prosecution. Every person has the right to fair trial by impartial and independent court, which will have the well-substantiated ruling as to participation of the prosecutor in protecting the rights envisaged by Article number 6 of the Convention. It's necessary to say that prosecutor participates in all the criminal cases judged by court by supporting public prosecution. The role of prosecutor in criminal trial is multifaceted. He protects rights and freedoms, protects the society from criminals, discovers crimes, prevents potential crime, and so on. And prosecutors should convince judicial authorities that his opinions in relation to the defendant are well substantiated. Prosecutor insists on considering all the evidence collected through the criminal procedure. Prosecutor has got this right throughout all the process and in different trial courts as well. And the court is obliged to have well-substantiated ruling. There are cases when first trial court acquits the defendant, and there could be a review. Prosecutor will supervise the presence in court of all the witnesses in order to clearly identify and disclose all the instances of the case. As to the European Court of Human Rights, it's necessary to establish circumstances related to the guilt of the defendants in the same way as the absence of violation of rights to fair trial. European Court maintains that if national courts do not provide for clear-cut response to the questions, so that maybe some remedies were neglected, that would mean the breach of rights to fair trial. At the national level, Moldova has taken on board a number of bylaws and regulatory acts about convention and the law on indemnity of public damage or the right to due process which is not procrastinated. It's necessary to comply with Article number 6 of the European Convention. There could be indemnity for people who are criminally prosecuted, but subsequently they were either taken out of criminal prosecution or acquitted. European Convention and addendum protocols are part of international agreements and international treaties, one of the parties of which is Moldova. Moldova, and courts should take into account provisions of Article 4 of the Constitution of Moldova, which maintains when there are just discrepancies between internal laws and external laws, the international law will be predominant. Thank you very much. I wish you a very successful conference. Thank you very much, Alexander. It's a shame you couldn't participate in person. And I would like to give the floor, and this will be the final part of this chunk of the conference. It will be General Prosecutor of Tajikistan Republic, Yusuf Ahmadzad Rahman. Esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to the organizers for having been invited and provided with this opportunity to see my colleagues. I will speak about protection of vested rights and interests of citizens in Tajikistan Republic. Rights and freedoms of people are of supreme importance, and they are protected by the Constitution and the laws of the Republic and by the international legal acts. Tajikistan is not a member of a European Convention of Human Rights and European Union, but we ratified all the international treaties about human rights under the aegis of UN. The supervision of compliance with the rights of and freedoms of citizens by different executives and authorities are one of the very important directions for activities of prosecutor's office, which is envisaged by the Constitution. Prosecutor's office plays a very important role in protection of economic, political, social, and cultural freedoms and rights of citizens. Just by way of an example, in 2020 and in Q1 2021, prosecutor's office conducted more than 70,000 validations of compliance with the legislation and 32,000 acts of prosecutors' response were formed based on that. 37,000 persons were prosecuted in the administrative way. It was about administrative misdemeanor, and there were also some criminal cases. And all told, the indemnity was more than 500 million samuni. That was the indemnity paid out to the claimants. There were 45,000 motions and petitions of the citizens about violation of their rights, and prosecutor's office also verified more than 30,000 such motions, and most of those petitions were satisfied by prosecutor's response. It's very important to protect the rights of socially vulnerable people, low-income groups, minors, disabled people, not able-bodied citizens. In 2020 and first part of 2021, 225 prosecutors' inspections and validations about breach of human rights were done. It was about protection of family, mother, and child guardians, and about 1,500 instances of breach of law were identified. Also, there are provisions in the Constitution about pensions, protection of disabled people and senior citizens. Over those half a year or even less, 150 prescriptions were identified by the prosecutor's office. 60,000 officials were also prosecuted. As to the sphere of housing code, family code, and others, prosecutor's office sends over lots of claims to different judicial bodies. More than 600 petitions and criminal proceedings were brought to the court in the amount of more than 35 million samuni as indemnity. It was satisfied the court. Protection of human rights are in the central attention of prosecutors when they exercise their functions of criminal prosecution and coordinating the activities of law enforcement bodies to counter criminality, and also for investigative bureaus and inquest bureaus, because they also have broad powers to disrupt breach of law and application of measures of legal liability. And if they do anything wrong, they might have very adverse impact upon freedoms and rights of people. As to countering torture, Tajikistan puts together lots of comprehensive efforts via Committee Against Torture, Committee on Human Rights, and special rapporteurs on the issues of torture and other defamation and other actions. Criminal Code of Tajikistan was amended. There are some more stringent sanctions for torture now, and fine is excluded from ways of punishment for different corpus delicti. We're in line with Convention Against Torture and European Convention on Human Rights. In 2019, Prosecutor General adopted the guidelines on methods and ways of exercising prosecutors' supervision over prevention, identification, and investigation of torture. These are the guidelines for prosecutors' bodies for effective countering efforts of torture. Prosecutors' human rights supervision is also exercised in pre-detention facilities and in prisons. This is about compliance with the norms for the rights of people in detention. Freedoms and rights of the military servicemen are protected by the Military Prosecutor's Office, which is part of Prosecutor's General Office of our Republic. We intensify legal relations with all the states, all the countries, and we submitted the draft agreements on rendering legal aid. We send them over to all the countries of the European region. We signed treaties with Hungary and Czech Republic, and we're ready and willing to have a very fruitful dialogue with other countries. General Prosecutor's Office of our Republic will adhere to observing the rights of citizens and streamlining our practical means towards this end. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot indeed. I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to all the panelists in this part of our plenary for very fascinating presentations, for clear-cut analysis, for their proposals. Now we have a recess. I invite you to have lunch now.